Alright, this video is an introduction to generic editing views. Honestly, I wanted to do more, but I'll squeeze what we didn't cover here into the next one. So, by now you know that you can use the admin panel to edit any objects that you can add to an app's admin.py. And I think I mentioned before that in order for a user to be able to edit the objects of a model in the admin panel, that user has to be staff and has to have permission to edit the model or be a super user. But what if you want visitors to be able to add objects, like comments? Even if you require accounts, you might not want to give all of your users staff status. As you might remember from the Polls app, you can update an object from user input. The Polls app had a simple function-based view for accepting user input from a form. But, as with the list view and the detail view, Django also provides class-based views for user input. These are called generic editing views. Before I get into generic editing views, I want to make some additions to the app. I'm going to add a details field to the project and a status update model which links to the project. I now have my changes, a detail field in project and a status update table. I'm going to run the migrations, then write up a few tests. As I said before, setup runs before each test in the test case class. There's another method which can run once in the class initiation. Any objects created by this method are available to all of the tests. This is a class method called setupTestData. I'm going to use this to create a project and a status update. Since a project has a created by field, which is a foreign key to the user, I'm also going to create a user object. To do that, I'll import getUserModel from Django contrib auth. Oops, don't forget to import status update. Don't need a setup now. I won't have to test the creation of the project each time, since other tests won't run without the project. I'll test to make sure my project has an str defined. I have to include self and CLS to create and refer to the objects. Python doesn't care if you call it self or CLS, but it's traditional to use CLS in class methods and self otherwise. You might not realize that I'm cheating a bit. I'm pausing the recording frequently and running the tests. This video would be a lot longer if I showed you all that. I didn't have to run the test, I just had to start writing it to remember that I didn't define an str for status update. Now, let's get to those views. I'll start with a list view and a detail view similar to those in the Polls app. Oops, must import the models. These views will get a lot more complicated than this, but this is a start. And we need templates. Need to create the templates directory. You can change this, but by default, the list template will be prosdib projectlist.html. And by default, the detail view will be prosdib projectdetail.html. For now, I'll put something simple in a list view and detail view. Now let's see what this looks like. Ugly for now, but it works. Now it's time for the editing views. I'll make a create view, an update view, and a detail view. Editing views are a little more complicated than the list and detail views. You either have to define the fields or define a form. Forms are a lot more powerful. To define a form, I have to create a forms.py in the app. In forms.py, import model form from Django Forms and import project from models. The important things are defined in the form's inner meta class. Those are the model and the fields. I didn't add the created by field. I'll add code to set that automatically. Now that I define the form, I'll tell a view to use the form. By default, this view expects a template named projectform.html. This seems like a good time to introduce the extends tag. I probably should have done that earlier. I'm going to create a base template, and all the other templates will inherit from it. I like to prefix my base HTML with an underscore, but that's not standard. It's just my preference. In my base, I'm going to add the HTML that a proper HTML file should have. Templates are extended with blocks. Now I'll go back to my other templates and put the content into content blocks. Let's see how the improved templates look. Cool. Let's get back to the form. In a way, there are two forms, the Python form and the HTML form, but they work together. Create view and update view each pass a form object to the template. When called, the form object prints an HTML form. The HTML form object prints the HTML that the form object prints does not include the form tags or submit button. And in addition to those, you have to add the CSRF token. This is pretty ugly. With styling, you can improve the way it looks. More on that later, but at least I want to get my labels, controls, and help text aligned. Instead of just calling the form, I'll call out the form fields individually. I'll see how this looks after I fix this typo. Still ugly, and I'll fix that later, but for now, at least the form isn't confusing. With generic editing views, Django has to be told where to go after updating or creating a model object. One way to tell it is to define a getAbsoluteURL method in the model. I defined a getAbsoluteURL to be the detail view of the model, to the model that I will have created. Another way is to define a success URL in the view. I have to use reverse lazy instead of reverse because views.py is interpreted before urls.py. Success URL in the view will take precedence over getAbsoluteURL in the model. If you need to build a URL, define a getSuccessURL method in the view. Update view is similar to create view. In urls.py, the path for the update view needs the pk variable just like the path for the detail view. I don't have a link to update the objects in my templates, so I'll add one now. Now I can see what my update form looks like. Great. Now a delete view. Real quick because I want to get on with the status update. Now to create the delete view. Now I'll add a delete link in the detail template. There are two more things that I'd want to cover today, but I think there's only time for one. In the next video, I'll cover updating status updates with form sets. But I'll wrap up this video with authorization. Django provides a mixin called permission required mixin. I'm going to add the mixin to the create, update, and delete views. Permission required requires you to define a permission required attribute. I find it annoying that it's add and change instead of create and update, which would match the views. You can see the default permissions by looking for using Django authentication system and look for default permissions. I'm logged in as super user. I'll create another user without so much power. If tester1 looks like something else, I promise it was an accident. I noticed it later while editing, and I'm not going to change it now. This new user is not staff or super user and has no permissions. I didn't add the permissions mix into the list or display view. But an unlogged in visitor or a logged in user won't be able to create, update, or delete. I meant a logged in user without permissions. Django doesn't provide this login template. I had to create it. I think that's strange because Django provides everything you need to log in users except the templates. This isn't the same as logging into the admin panel. Django does, of course, provide for that. This post about using the built-in login system on simpleisbetterthancomplex.com has a good set of instructions about creating the template and the folders in which the template should be placed. The instructions have you create a folder called registration and put a simple login HTML in that folder. You also have to add the URL paths. Since this is a pretty old post, Vitor Freitas used an older format for his paths. I believe those still work, but it's more common today to use path instead of URL. So the login path would be login/. The rest is the same. But for this project, instead of this method, I used my Tugshire Auth app. Following the instructions in the README, I renamed Tugshire to Zvapli and added the path to my project URLs. The way this is set up, an unlogged visitor will get a login prompt. A logged-in user without permissions will get a 403. I'll use the admin panel to give this user more privileges. And that will be it for now. There's more about these views to go over, but I'll finish that up next time.